one rarely gets to hear, an opportunity to hear these kinds of instruments, which, as I'm sure Curtis will explain, both instruments have a very, very long history, stretching back to the Middle Ages, and still are very much alive and well today. And at a certain phase in both instruments' history, they were even used as courtly, sophisticated instruments, with sonatas being written for them, and so on and so forth, as you'll soon hear. Bruce Teter, of course, is well known here in the Los Angeles area, a great multi-instrumentalist. He plays with several of the ensembles, around in the area. And Curtis Berak is not only a performer, but also is one of the really fine makers of harpsichords. Curtis is in Los Angeles as well. So I'll turn the show over to you guys.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. So we thought we'd just start, and since this is a concert relating to the exhibition, and it was suggested that we do this because, I don't know if you saw the exhibition in the library of musical instruments of the Doheny collection, but in the Doheny collection is 2 hurdy-gurdys. So we got this idea to sort of base a concert around the hurdy-gurdys. And so just so everybody can kind of hear what it sounds like, we'll just start and then explain the instrument, just in case there's people here who don't know about this. thank you. Anyway, that's what the hurdy-gurdy sounds like, and you can see it's a good companion to the bagpipe. It's actually kind of sounds like a bagpipe with strings. And the French word for this instrument is the vielle à roue. Now, generally in France, they just call it the vielle, which comes from the term for the medieval fiddle, which was called the vielle archée, which meant the viol with the bow, and this was the viol with the wheel, because that's how it works. When you turn this crank, there's a rosined wooden wheel that is activating the strings just like a bow would, and in a continuous manner, so it's like an infinitely long sound, at least as long as you're turning the handle. And then it has a different number of strings. You see there's 6 tuning pegs here, but you don't always have all the strings engaged. Depending on what key you're playing in, you use the strings for the key. And then the first thing is there's a series of keys here which I play. This is actually, in this particular instrument, it's 2 octaves. And they come up and they touch the melody string. There's 2 strings through the key box which just play the melody. So if I take off the others, these are the 2 melody strings. Is there something else on? So you can see how this works as a bow, and then there's the melody. So I'm playing the melody, and then there's a series of drone strings which you... Then it starts sounding more like a bagpipe, get the drone strings going. And then one other feature of the hurdy-gurdy seems to be this little buzzing percussion part. And I get a percussive rhythm when I give an impulse with my hand on the crank. And I adjust the buzz to actually hear it. So you can have it. You adjust it till it just goes on when you give it the slightest impulse again. And so you have the drone, the melody, and the rhythm. So anyway, that's how this instrument works. And then the instruments that I do have here are all antique instruments, and they're all French instruments, even though the hurdy-gurdy ranges many areas of Europe. In fact, the earliest ones that we know of were in Spain, in about, I guess, on Santiago de Compostela, this cathedral, there's a carving of 2 Spanish kings playing the hurdy-gurdy, playing actually a big 2-man hurdy-gurdy. And that hurdy-gurdy was, the carving was done sometime between 1029 and 1129. So the instrument goes way back. And there's been pretty much continuous playing of the hurdy-gurdy since then, up into the present, where people like Sting pretend to play it at the Oscars. So there's sort of a direct line in all of that somehow. Let's see. The next thing, I guess, well, we're going to play like music, different kinds of music from the different periods, and I'll be switching different hurdy-gurdys, just mainly due to key and pitch and things like that. Oh, I'll just mention this one since I have it now. This is a hurdy-gurdy from, let's see, this is 1890, made by probably, who's considered the best maker of the folk instruments. Anyway, it's the most sought-after instrument by the hurdy-gurdy players now, and it's by a maker named Gilbert Nigu, who made instruments in a little village of Genzat. And this is my most recent hurdy-gurdy that I found about 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago on eBay. And I tried to get it into shape for today because it's a perfect match for the folk bagpipe. Now,
I guess I can mention what we just played so you can see in the program. We just played 2 French folk pieces called Pierre's Tune and a Bourrée of Aurora Sand, which has an interesting history from a play that was written by Aurora Sand, who was the daughter of George Sand. And this music was in that play. So we finished those 2. Now we'll move to the Rennaissance Dances by Susato. And maybe while Curtis is getting that up, I can just mention quickly, you probably all know what a bagpipe is. It's a double reed instrument that's often the bag is filled up with air using the mouth from this way. But on these French pipes, they can go either way, either by the mouth or it's much easier using the bellows so that you don't have to have quite the lung capacity and to fill it up. Basically, it's like a hurdy-gurdy, and it has the chanter that plays the melody and drones. The drone pipes are, in this case, one up over the shoulder, one an octave higher here, and it has a third even octave higher, this tiny little one that I don't use right now because it's too hard to always get in tune. So I'll have a little bit more to say about the bagpipe when we get to the other one. But for these pieces that we're about to play, I'm going to play a different instrument, which is essentially a bagpipe without the bag. And this is the crumhorn, which is like the bagpipe that has a double reed inside of a cap, just like the bagpipe. So it's essentially in the oboe family. And it was very popular in the Renaissance. It comes in many different sizes. I'll be playing 2 different sizes. And it doesn't have much dynamic capability because you're not controlling the reed with your mouth, so you can only play at one volume. So in the Baroque era, it generally fell out of favor because of the interest in more expressive instruments in the Baroque. But in France, they have a very strong love for kind of nasal, reedy sounds, and they just love the bagpipes. And so the crumhorn actually lived on in the Baroque French courts. The crumhorn did, you know. So now we'll play the Susato dances.
So, do you want to check my G with that or with the tuning machine?
Tuning machine.
You know, there'll be kind of a lot of tuning because when you have an instrument like this, which changes with the temperature, and then all the strings are basically on all the time, you have to really be careful with the tuning. Did you mention the 3 dances of one? They playing 3 dances of Susato. One called Morn Dance, and then second one Hoboken Dance, and the third one is actually called 4 Brawls. guess since I'll say a little bit about this instrument, because I think the instruments are interesting. This is actually an instrument from the Baroque era, and this one is made by, again, one of the best makers of that era, and he was very sought after. His name was Jean Louvet, and him and his brother Pierre Louvet were considered two of the top makers for this instrument. This is made in 1747, this particular instrument, and there's an old label right there describing his address. And on the back, there's still a wax seal left from maybe somebody who owned this in the past. It was made in the form of like a lute body, which the makers of these instruments he probably made lutes as well. They made all kinds of instruments, and the hurdy-gurdy, though, was his specialty. And then it's very beautiful carving on this one of a woman with shells in her hair and flowers and nice jewelry. And there was, I think that this is the carver that was known as La Fille, who was a famous carver from about the mid-18th century. You find carvings that they think identified by this person. I mean, they've just sort of made up this person. And she has, if it was a woman, become famous now among instrument collectors because whoever it was did such beautiful work, and then they thought it was a woman because there's such incredible attention to detail of women's fashion, jewelry. In this case, the flowers, the way they're attached in the hair is probably how they would have been done, and the shells attached in the hair, and there's always a lot of attention to that. And then even when they do male figures, like I have a turban Turk head on another one, and there's jewelry in the turban, and it's perfectly rendered. Where on a lot of instruments you see it's more or less a generic carving. So anyway, the instruments with this kind of carving are considered somewhat of a treasure. So anyway, yes.
So the next piece will be the Cantigas de Santa Maria, number 322, which the Cantigas were a collection of about 400 songs by Alfonso El Sabio, and they're all songs about the miracles of the Virgin Mary. This particular one has an interesting story that Curtis knows.
Well, use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is. The stories are usually some miracle that the Virgin Mary has caused to happen, and this is a story about a particular individual who loved to eat rabbit, and he was very gluttonous. In fact, he was eating rabbit so aggressively that he choked on the bone, and it stuck in his throat, and he just fell down dead on the ground from choking. And so he was a beloved person, and they placed him in the church, and they were asking forgiveness and blessings from the Virgin Mary. And as they were singing this song, he coughed, and out came the bone, and they grabbed it and they paraded around, and it represented this great miracle that had happened. So that is essentially a story being told, and this should be this should have somebody singing the tale while we're playing, but we don't do that.
So will you emulate the choking?
I don't know when to see if I can think of this. And this is a French folk hurdy-gurdy from about 1890 that I've set up in kind of a tuning that might have been a kind of tuning that would have been done in the medieval time.
two works from the French Baroque, duets, specifically written for hurdy-gurdy and musette. Duets by Naudot, and we'll play the Très Lentement and fanfare to begin. And yeah, those two notes.
Okay. Now, this is hurdy-gurdy, another one that was a treasure for me to find, and this is one by a maker named Caron of Versailles, and it was actually in very, very excellent condition from the Baroque era, which is rare. I mean, it looked like pretty much I'm one of the first people to play this because it hadn't actually even been set up. And was, like I said, it was made in Versailles, and it has ink, instead of an actual label, it has written in ink, Caron, and we don't know his first name, Luthier of Versailles, to the Queen. So he was the maker actually for Marie Antoinette. Then it gives his address, and then it says 1786, which is very shortly before the French Revolution, so he may have left in a hurry. Maybe that's why it didn't get played. But anyway.
So I'll just say a couple words about the musette, which was an instrument that the French court used as a musical representation of their imitation of nature. It was one of their ideals of to emulate nature, and they would play pastoral games in their beautiful gardens, and they used the hurdy-gurdy and musette as representations of pastoral instruments. But of course, they didn't want the kind of gross, loud instruments that were around at the time, the Renaissance bagpipes and the loud hurdy-gurdy. So they refined both of these instruments into this musette, a very small bagpipe. But then it's actually one of the more technically advanced woodwinds for the time, because most woodwinds just have simple holes for all the notes, and you do fancy finger work to get the sharps and flats. Well, to make it easier, they installed keys for all the sharps and flats. And so I used my leftover thumb and pinky, mostly the thumb, to play all the sharps and flats. And they also made it more advanced, and they added a second chanter, which extended the range up another fifth. The second chanter never sounds because it's stopped, and it only sounds when you play the keys. And on the last piece that we play in our program, I'll play one of the notes from that chanter, so you'll hear that. But so it has the capability of playing duets with itself because it has two chanters, and you can play one chanter with the pinky and the thumb playing the keys here, the pinky here, and all like that. So they were made of beautiful woods, ivory and silver, because they were made for the court and for the kings and queens of France. So they were often vied for as objects of art, and they fell out of favor after the French Revolution because of their representation with aristocracy. So now we'll play a set by Philbert de la Vigne. Begin. Okay, and so it'll be a fanfare, and looks like we're skipping the badine, which is, and doing the 2 minuets.
Folk music. Okay, now we'll play some French folk music. And we'll just start out with this is music of the 19th century, and it's more music that we'll start out with a piece called La Tournate, which is a bourrée, which they loved to dance to in France in the 19th century. And this is a very typical of the style of the folk music, so we thought we'd pick this one as sort of the, there's a lot of these, the French sort of very happy sounding, content country pastoral type of pieces. it's a fun thing to watch because it's become a tradition that it stops just like that, but the dancers don't stop. They keep going and they do the dance, and you can hear the pattern of the bourrée in the feet. And you hear the stomping, 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 and they go through the piece one time, and then the band comes back in at just the right time all together, and then they finish it one more time. So it's kind of a nice dance to watch. And it's the people in one region, the Auvergne region, have this tune, and they dance it one way, and then the people in the Bourbonnais region have that tune, and they dance it a completely different way. So it's actually two, even though separate ones, and nobody knows where the tune actually originated. So, now we'll do some, I mean, there's a lot of tunes in that spirit like we just played, but in the more modern folk era, in the 20th century, there's been a revitalization of the hurdy-gurdy and the French folk music, and we'll play some things now. I mean, they've gone from this kind of happier type music, which they still play a lot, but they've added a lot of things that sound a little more Eastern, a little more exotic. And one of them is actually what we'll start out with, which is supposed to be some old piece from the 13th century, which I mean, the title means The Sounds of Cyprus. But anyway, this was something that was found by one of the mainstream folk players and somehow written to play on the hurdy-gurdy and the bagpipes.
And the second tune is L'Oriental, so it obviously has its exotic meaning. And the third is Les Trois Canards.
play a couple of tunes that kind of stick in my mind, because the first time I went to this France, to this hurdy-gurdy festival that they have, where there's about 2,000 people playing hurdy-gurdies and bagpipes, and you'd think no other instrument existed, which they have around their Independence Day, around their 14th of July every year. There was something, this was the 20th year celebration of that festival, and they had an orchestra they called the Grand Orchestra, which consisted of 430 hurdy-gurdies and bagpipes. So we'll be playing the two pieces that they started out with, and they were playing it in a forest. It was very beautiful at this old chateau, and they had they had different keys and different instruments, and they worked out all kinds of nice parts for it. So anyway, these are two, something called Isabeau's Promine, which I'm not sure what that is, and then another bourrée called the Le Bien Temps. the last week. We have one more piece to play back in the Baroque era, a fanfare. So our last one is a relatively well-known little fanfare by a French composer named Moret.
So we thought we'd ask if there was any questions in particular. I know we're running over time, so if you have to leave, you can leave, but if you'd like to ask some questions, sure.
Hurdy-gurdy, what is the name?
Hurdy-gurdy.
Well, like I say, the French word is vielle or vielle à roux, and in many other languages it has similar names, like in Italian lira, and in Germany Dreileier. They usually refer to the word lyre, just the strings being and turning. But in English, this word, there's no other word but the hurdy-gurdy, because the English hated the instrument. When French people started appearing on their streets playing it, and it was usually French children or Savoyards. There's a lot of artwork to the effect, and they were generally poor and probably had decrepit instruments, and so they called the instrument the hurdy-gurdy after their term hurdy-burdy, which hurdy-burdy was just a racket, a noise, a bad sound, and so they came up with the idea, let's call it the hurdy-gurdy.